Hello, I am Disbrew, and we start the news this week with the fact that Diablo Immortal has generated $24 million in its first 2 weeks of launch, and that is just from mobile. Now, the US boasts the biggest market share as it says, but this comes from 8.5 million downloads, which is a lot of downloads considering to actually level a character in Diablo Immortal, it will cost you £88,000 or $110,000. Look, I know mobile microtransactions are massive, but I've never heard of a game costing that much. At least the amount of games that you could get for that sum alone really just draws into the question why anyone would do it. But you know what these games are like. They wouldn't have made a cap that big if somebody wasn't going to pay it somewhere. And so when you put it into perspective, $24 million isn't quite the number that I would have expected. And it might be because this game's reputation has definitely preceded itself. Everyone knows what they're getting into when they start Diablo Immortal. Now, this revenue is just from the mobile game, as it's also available on PC, and those numbers aren't tracked due to the service which the numbers come from being App Magic. But when you look at the split, you've got 43% of the revenue comes from the US, 23% from South Korea, 8% from Japan, and 6% from Germany. Hey, coming from the UK, I'm just kind of glad we're not on that list, to be honest. Interestingly, US accounts account for 26% of all the downloads, but make up 43% of the revenue, so we all know where the whales are coming from. Another interesting part is that the revenue is actually split pretty evenly across Apple and Android. Now, I know that the actual mobile ad revenue across Apple and Android isn't even at all. People will pay more for an Apple customer, so the fact that they don't actually spend more on this game is unusual. But you would expect that a game that would cost $110,000 to actually level your character to maximum would have every single bell and whistle feature you could possibly imagine, but it doesn't even allow you to change servers, with the Diablo community manager even having to advise players that you better get all your pals together and choose which server to join before starting the game, because it turns out $110,000 it's just not enough to pay a developer to make server transfers possible. I'm sorry, we just can't afford it. Everyone understands that mobile games are pay to win. There is a question of why anyone's allowed it to get that way, but it is how the economy developed in the first place. But Diablo Immortal is on PC, and it's still just as bad. Game developers will obviously push this as far as we can go, and as time goes on, we're definitely going to see all of this mobile nonsense move into the PC and console gaming space. It's just a question of when, and Blizzard seem to be wanting to lead the pack in this regard. Luckily though, not quite with Diablo 4, at least if you can trust them that much, as they do say that the microtransactions for Diablo 4 will be cosmetic only. I have to wonder how much of this is down to the Diablo Immortal backlash. Perhaps if it hadn't been quite so strong, Diablo 4 may have taken a different path. But for that, we'll have to wait and see. I've played Ark Survival Evolved for a significant amount of hours, but I'm still not quite sure what I think of Ark 2 having Souls-like melee combat, and how that's really going to fit into the flow of the game. Being a crafting survival game with PvP, fitting Souls melee combat into it as well seems like it's going to be a bit of a stretch, but I am interested to see how it plays out, and if they can get it to work, then it could be really cool in my opinion. With a recent trailer being released, obviously Vin Diesel is heavily tied into this game, but Studio Wildcard have described the combat as heavily skill-based Souls-like action, a rarely experienced thing in a PvP-based survival game. They've also talked about how Lost Ark 2 will feature third-person gameplay with, in quotes, advanced character traversal mechanics, including mantling, free climbing, parkour, sliding, and swinging. I have to admit, when they said they were making an Ark 2, I wasn't exactly sure which direction the game would go or how they could expand it, but movement mechanics being added to a game is something I am always keen on. If you can make a really complicated but still fluid movement mechanic, then that is exactly what I'm interested in, both from shooters and everything else. Combine that with an interesting skill-based combat system, and then everything that was already in the first Ark game, and I have to say, Ark 2 for me is shaping up to be one hell of a game. Let's just hope it launches in a better state than the first one did, although that launch will be pushed back until 2023. But, to tide people over, there is news that Vin Diesel says that an Ark movie is coming to the big screen. With the Jurassic Park franchise pretty much treading water in where it is story-wise, I think an Ark movie could bring something new to this whole dinosaur genre of movies, so I'm also pretty interested in that, and hey, I like Vin Diesel films. In Call of Duty news, we start with the idea that Modern Warfare Beta could indeed start with August due to an Amazon listing. Then moving on, we get Call of Duty Warzone is now removing cheaters' guns mid-game. This is something that they've done for a while, messing with cheaters. At one point, they just didn't do any damage to people, but it seems that they just like messing with them in new and innovative ways. Personally, I think them just not doing any damage is far better, because if you take their gun away, they now know they're in trouble. Whereas if you wait until they shoot people and then just realize that nobody's dying, I think that's a lot funnier myself. And then for the current Warzone, we get the new Resurgence map. I much prefer the smaller maps and Resurgence game modes in Warzone myself. I just don't think you can beat the pace of combat. And Fortune's Keep will be an interesting addition. I do question whether it will be an addition or a replacement, because quite frankly, I'd rather the variety and it just rotated round a lot like Apex does. The question I have with the map is, this is going to be very interesting to play on, because you've got obviously the 3 sections in the corners of the map, but the transitions between all of them could be awful. This entire center area could be rough to travel on, but pretty much traveling from any of these 3 corners just looks like an open death run. Yeah, when you do that in the small Warzone maps, you tend to run into trouble, so we're going to have to wait and see until we get into the match to see how the pathing works for it. But at the moment, just looking at the map, if all of this turns out to be high ground, these could be some interesting matches. The Last of Us is getting a remake, but the question is, what on earth are you remaking it into? Because it definitely doesn't look like the first game. What you see is something of Tess, where actually Games Radar describes it as a glow-up and she looks more human. But really, when you see the effect, I have no idea what you mean by more human. But secondly, how on earth has she aged 30 years in the remake? This is supposed to be the same person, and it definitely isn't the same person. It doesn't really matter at this point what you do to the graphics for me. You have completely and utterly changed her at a fundamental level, and that is not what a remake is for. If they're willing to do this to a character, I have to question, what are you doing to the rest of the game? Because it seems like you're drastically changing the vision of what it is, and when you do that, you lose the soul of the game. It just proves this is not something where they're looking to improve on what was there. They're looking to change and modernize what was there. And I can't say for sure exactly why they thought that Tess needed to age 30 years, but given the current climate, I can guess. I was a huge Overwatch player. It was the only FPS I played for a couple of years. And as much as Overwatch 2 keeps trying to get into hype mode, I have to say everything that comes out about it, it just seems to get more and more disappointing. We start with the news that Overwatch 2 plans to launch with just 3 new heroes, which is pretty pathetic considering how many years they just haven't even updated Overwatch for. All of that time and you've only got 3 heroes. Honestly, you've got to be having a bit of a laugh. Now, they've also announced that the seasons will be launching every 9 weeks, but Blizzard only plans to launch a new hero every other season, so every 18 weeks. That results in about 2.88 heroes a year, and even Overwatch had 3 heroes a year already, so if anything, it's slightly less than they were planning before, but even if we just call it 3 anyway, one of the reasons that Overwatch died was because of lack of content, because they didn't release enough new heroes. They're not changing that at all, inevitably resulting in Overwatch 2 ending up the same way. I think if you're going to do this, a new hero every single season like Apex does has to be the way forwards, and yet Blizzard just seems incapable of creating the content at the pace it's required. Now, I know there's other stuff which is meant to balance that out, like new maps and everything else, but really when it comes to Overwatch, the key part of the game is the heroes. That is what needed to be front and center of the creation, and it just doesn't seem to be part of their development. And I know that some people will defend it by going, well, every season will come with its own battle pass, but essentially, although battle passes do mean no more loot boxes, it's still just another way to get skins. And the thing is, this will be more constant money going into Blizzard's pocket. Fine, but a constant revenue source doesn't seem to be increasing the pace of hero creation, so I have to ask, what's the point? The good news is that Overwatch 2 is sticking to the free-to-play model that was actually promised all so long ago. Back when Overwatch 2 was originally announced, it was going to be a free upgrade for anyone that owned Overwatch in the first place, and now it's just going completely free-to-play, which, let's face it, is just a far more sensible option. But with free-to-play comes more hacks, and with Blizzard's slow pace of development when it comes to heroes, is actually cheat protection something that they're going to be able to stay on top of when it comes to free-to-play games? That really remains to be seen. And when you add all of this up, I question whether Junker Queen being 7 foot tall is really going to be enough. I really want to be excited for Overwatch 2, I hope it's a good game, But the issue with the first one was the pace of content, and it just seems like they haven't learned their lesson. Sure, they've got a battle pass now, so now they've sorted out their revenue stream for the long term. Great. But I don't really care about that. I care about the players. And they seem to have improved their revenue generating strategy without actually improving the content which the players are going to be getting. To be waiting 18 weeks for a new hero, quite frankly, I just find unacceptable. But for now, that's it from me. Let me know what you thought of any of the topics down below. Like the video if you like the video, subscribe, more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.